Hello everybody. Today we're going to be doing some basic pandas and some introduction to data cleaning. So what I've done so far is I've downloaded some necessary libraries like Numpy and Pandas, and I've stored a data set which I found online called traveltimes.csv. I've stored it using the read CSV function of Pandas, and I've stored it into a variable called df, which stands for data frame. So first let's see what's there in our df. So let's take the first 10 elements. You can do that using head, and the first how many ever you can see, you type in the brackets. So let's say we want to see the first 10, and this is what we have. We have a date, we have start time, day of week, where he is going to, the distance traveled, max speed, all that. So let's take this as an example and try to clean it. So the first thing you may notice is there's this column called fuel, and a lot of it is null values, and a lot of it is also these blank values. So null values we'll deal with later. The first thing we can do is we can try and remove these blank values altogether. So how do we do that? So what we can do is we can redefine our data frame to be equal to the case where df of fuel dot str of 0, which means the zeroth string of the fuel column of df should not be equal to whatever the condition is. What do we not want it to be equal to? This. So now when we run this, let's check how our df looks. So what we expect is these rows altogether should get deleted. So let's see, yeah. So now there are no more of these hyphenated rows. So now all we have is null values. Another thing we have to look at is, and this is very important in data science, is first to get the information of the data frame. So let's run this. And yeah, so here you have everything, all the columns, and what their count is and what their data type is. So as you can see, there are 186 non-null elements in fuel. That means there are about 17 null values. So we need to deal with those. And another thing you can notice is that it's an object type, but we want it to be, object basically means string, and we want it to be integer or float type, right? So how do we do that? Luckily there's a pandas tool to help us with that. So let's say df of fuel, we want to convert it to a numeric. So we can do that using pd.toNumeric, which is a, pd is again pandas, that's how we imported it, .toNumeric of the column that we want, which is again df.fuel. So let me just copy paste that, and yeah, let's run that, and it worked. This is not an error, it's just a warning. So let's rerun df.info, and yeah, so you can see fuel type, which was an object, has now been converted to float. So this will help us to deal with these null values. How? So the way we deal with null values is we either drop them entirely, which seems wrong here because there are quite a few, or we can replace them with something. So what do we replace it with? The most common thing is you can replace it with the mean of the whole thing or the median of the whole thing. So let's do mean. Let's replace it with the average value of that column. So let's do df of fuel is equal to df.fuel, and we do this using the fill na. This basically stands for fill null. So we do fill na of, again, df.fuel, which is the fuel column, and what we want to fill it with. What do we want to fill it with? We want to fill it with the mean, right? So let's do mean. Let's run this, and so now when we run this again, hopefully all these null values get replaced with whatever is the mean of the fuel column, and yeah, that worked. Okay, so it got filled with this value 8.69. So what pandas did is it went through all the values of this fuel column, found the mean, and replaced every null value with just that. So that should help us. So now what's the next thing we do? Looking at this data, let's say looking at this going to column, we can see there are two things. He's recorded his travels going home and going to GSK, wherever that is. That's probably his office or something. So now suppose from this large data set, suppose we only wanted to take all the rows where he recorded going to home. How do we do that? So let's call a new data frame called data frame home. And we do this using a function called .loc, which is .locate. So let's say data frame home equals to df.locate, right? And then what we do is we open the brackets and we write the criteria that we want inside. So what is the criteria here? We want this column going to be equal to home, right? So we want the column df of going to be equal to home. HOM is a capital H. Yeah. So let's run this and yeah, perfect. So now let's see our df of home. Let's see the first 10 elements. Let's see the first 7 elements just to try out dot head. And yeah, look at that. All of these are going to home. Perfect. Now, one more thing that we can do is, now that everything is going to home, in this df home data set, let's delete this column going home, because we know that all of them are going to home, right? So how do we do that? We redefine df home equals to df home dot drop. We use the dot drop command, and in brackets you mention which column you're dropping. So here we're dropping the going to column, and you also have to mention along which axis you're dropping. Now since we want to drop the whole axis vertically, just like that, we want this whole axis gone, right? So we say axis equals to 1. It's a very standard procedure in dropping a column. Now if we rerun this, hopefully this going to column doesn't exist anymore, and yeah, it's gone. And another really important thing when you're doing data analysis like this is to be able to group something. So suppose I asked you, looking at this data, for this man, on what day did he find it hardest to get to work or hardest to go home? Like on what day did it take him the longest on average? So how would you do that? So you do that by grouping by the day of the week. So let's try to group by. So let's create an object called day group, right? So or group by day, whatever you want to call it. It's just a variable. Day group, and here we're going to use the group by function. So group by, and let's group by home. Sorry, by day of week. Not by home, by day of week. Right? And let's run that. Now, if we print day of group, you'll notice that we won't get anything. It's just an object. But suppose we want to group by this, and we want to display the mean or the average. Let's do that. And now let's see day of group. And yeah, sure enough, we have 5 rows, one for every day of the week. And there are all these different values. So if you notice, there are some categorical values which don't come. Like date, for example, you can't mean, right? So it doesn't even show up here. But everything else that is numerical gets displayed here. So for example, we see that on Friday, the total time that he spent coming home is the least, whereas Wednesday, for example, is the highest. For some reason, the traffic on Wednesday was extremely high. And so this is just one small amount of the data you can analyze using basic Pandas. And next, we're going to see how to use matplotlib or any Python library to sort of plot this data. Thanks for watching.